old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you. And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. We are your Jedi Council. I am Urza Master, that is Lord Uther, and joining us as always, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. Welcome.
Hello.
Good to see you, gentlemen.
Good to see you.
Today is a momentous occasion for Star Wars fans. It is the episode in which we will talk episode 5, our fourth episode. This is episode 5's discussion from the blockbuster new release from Disney Plus, Ahsoka. Now, I will probably mispronounce that at some point on this show or another, but Ahsoka, if you've not been following, is a tremendous release for Disney Plus. Certainly, I would say, and I'll leave it to you all, but I would say is following in the footsteps of The Mandalorian with its reach and scope and narrative effort, shall we say. Now, this episode and some of the content therein, by virtue of what it is, has sparked some controversy online. So tonight's episode, you notice, may be a little different in that we're going to be interjecting a little more, discussing a little heavier, but again, we are Jedi Masters. And not of the not yet Master, we don't grant you the title of Master variety. We are actual Masters. With that, as always, I will turn it over to Jedi Master Psyllium Maas for background and foundation.
Thank you, Ursa Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thanks to all of our friends, both on these shores and internationally. Welcome. Tonight, we get the very reason this particular series was made. This show was made for this episode and what unspools within. I'm talking, of course, of Ahsoka. I'm talking episode 5, Shadow Warrior, written and directed by Dave Filoni, the show's creator. That's your background. Let's get right into the main event. Last week, we ended on a cliffhanger. We had Ahsoka Tano, who was defeated by the Dark Jedi Baylan Skoll. Her fate was uncertain. She fell off a cliff, disappeared perhaps beneath the waves of the planet Cetos. When she came to, she found herself in a different space, a different reality, a different realm. And we recognize that realm, fans of Star Wars Rebels, the animated show. And it had even been given a name, the World Between Worlds. And as she came to in her new surroundings, she was greeted affectionately with a hello snips from her former Jedi Master, Anakin Skywalker, looking like Anakin Skywalker prior to his transformation in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, into the Lord Darth Vader. And then it went with just a hint of John Williams' famous Imperial March to lead us out. So we spent all week with our stomach in knots and our pulses racing. What possibly would happen next? Well, first off, while it was the world between worlds, it was not the world between worlds, at least the way it was presented to us in its animated form. Yes, the surroundings were familiar, but the space was utilized much differently than they did in its predecessor. In the animated series, it represented itself as a series of doorways and entry-exit points into the timeline generated by the Force. And it was actually a physical space in which Ezra Bridger, the young Jedi trainee who discovered the entrance, went in and saved Ahsoka's life during the course of that episode by actually entering one of those dimensional doorways and pulling her from a fate worse than death. That's not how they approached it here. Here it was much more, I suppose, symbolic or what have you, representing Ahsoka's state of mind. And it's been refracted to make the Force, more of a transcendental realm, I guess is the best way to say it. She's neither dead nor alive, as this episode begins. Anakin has knowledge that only the Anakin who perished at the Battle of Endor could have had. So is he a Force ghost? Is he just a representation of Ahsoka's, imagination or consciousness? They don't answer it specifically. You can draw and infer your own conclusions. But this Anakin definitely represents Ahsoka's feelings, thoughts, concerns within the Force. And so after a little bit of banter, when they first meet, you look old. You look exactly the same, Master. He tells her that it's time for her final lesson. Now remember, Ahsoka walked away from the Jedi Order in the Clone Wars animated series, never took the trials, never became a fully accredited Jedi Knight. And she said, well, it's too late for that. But of course, Anakin has his own ideas. He ignites his Jedi lightsaber, blue, and they proceed to duel. And this is not a duel, this is not a combat duel to injure or to maim or to kill. Think of this like the moment that we saw the flashback in last summer's Obi-Wan Kenobi, in which Hayden Christensen as Anakin and Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi were sparring on Coruscant. In between episodes 2 and 3, we were led to believe. And the purpose of this duel between Ahsoka and Anakin here at the start is this is how he considers training. It's like calisthenics. It's like exercise. He's not out for blood. He's there to reinforce the seriousness and purpose of his message. So you get some great early choreography of the duel, but you have to think of what Anakin's motives are here. It's not to injure or kill his former Padawan. And she bests him. Like, she's able to fight him off and basically show herself to be his equal in that prowess, and says so as much. There's nothing more you can teach me, Master. And that's when he cuts literally the floor right out from under her. And one of my first oh my God moments while watching this episode, just slashes down at this barrier and sends her plummeting hundreds, thousands of feet, into a murky abyss. Now, it has been pointed out online, Dave Filoni is, in addition to being a Star Wars guru, a Tolkien student. And that all along, he has ascribed Ahsoka's character arc to be similar to that of Gandalf. Gandalf the Grey, Gandalf the White. So if we're going to use that analogy, whether it's Balin or whether it's Anakin, Ahsoka plunges. She takes the metaphorical and physical fall from who she is as a character right now. And then later on, when we get to it, she will then arise as something different, something new.
Rise.
Beautiful.
No.
Now, what is Ahsoka wrestling with here with Anakin? She blames herself for his fall. She was not privy to the Palpatine Padme machinations, his attachment, his desire to see Padme saved from the fate he saw using the Force. He fell sway to Palpatine's lies and became Lord Vader, as we all saw chronicled in Revenge of the Sith. She wasn't there for any of that, and she carries around all this guilt, all this suffering. If I hadn't left the Order, if I hadn't left my master, if I had been by his side, then perhaps he wouldn't have been corrupted and fallen to the dark side. I could have saved him. And so that has been, since she made those discoveries in the animated show, that has been what's sort of driven this Ahsoka character. And when we were first introduced to her in live action in The Mandalorian in season 2, she's a solitary warrior laying siege to Morgan Elsbeth's village fortress, and she's taking out guards, like John J. Rambo, in the dark and seeing only her saber. And what was that? What? So her personality post Anakin's fall has been to retreat from others, to be very monastic, to be very repressed, and to be very single-minded. You'll remember she was hunting Grand Admiral Thrawn even in that episode of The Mandalorian. And so there have been comments online and in the Star Wars universe about how, well, she's very much like Qui-Gon Jinn. She's very reserved and so forth. Where's that fun Ahsoka? Where's that child, that we saw in the animated series growing up? And that's what this episode has kind of set us up for, because as she plunges into this mist and arises, suddenly we have a brand new incarnation of Ahsoka Tano. How we met her in the animated series only brought this time to glorious flesh and blood. And the first thing that slaps you as the smoke continues to billow and clone troopers emerge and AT-AT, little tanks start chumbling after him, we realize we've come back in the past, and Ahsoka was a child. Like, it doesn't quite hit the same when you're watching it as an animated format as you do when you see that she was a child soldier. Imagine Anakin Skywalker, who was, at the time of the Clone Wars and so forth, around 19 years old when we first saw Hayden Christensen, and was animated as such throughout. Imagine if that had been 9-year-old Anakin that we met in The Phantom Menace.
This is pod racing.
There you go. Now just hand him a lightsaber and say, "Congratulations, son. Now go out and kill." It makes you stop for a second, and you realize that the atrocities of war, which are consistent with any battlefield diaries or so forth throughout history, or other shows that have tackled this. I know Star Trek has shown us the effects of the Klingon Wars and the Dominion Wars and all of that. I mean, bodies in stretchers and corpses strewn amongst the battlefields, that's a lot to take in. I should point out that the actress who plays young Ahsoka in these scenes is Ariana Greenblatt, and it's okay if you don't recognize her under the Ahsoka costume, but you should know her credits. She was the young Gamora who chastised Thanos in Infinity War. She had a big supporting role in this summer's, the year's #1 box office release, Barbie. She plays America Ferrera's daughter, who's grown too old for dolls. And she was also in that silly Adam Driver, Kylo Ren, movie 65, in which he's from the future and they land on Earth and there's dinosaurs and they fight the dinosaurs with laser guns. If that's your thing, you'll probably get a kick out of it. But she was the human girl that survives the crash and he has to protect. So she's making quite a name for herself with an early career. But here she is, this child, and I want to quote specifically Anakin's lines to her when she realizes that, again, this is all part of her mind, but that she's come back to the site of literally one of the first battles that she and Anakin fought in the animated series, the Battle of Ryloth. And he tells her, she says, "I don't want to fight, Master." And he says, "We must adjust to the times. When Obi-Wan taught me, we were keepers of the peace. But now, to win this war, I have to teach you to be a soldier." And so we get a lot of Ahsoka's background just in that one exchange. She was force sensitive. She was trained, expecting to be trained as a Jedi. And the Jedis are supposed to be using the Force for knowledge and defense, never attack. And we've heard that from Yoda when he was instructing Luke on Dagobah. This isn't what she signed up for. She's a child soldier, and she's killing people, you know, etc. And clones that she's commanding with her master are dying. And there's a tender moment where a clone just about to expire's last reaches out for her hand. And again, it's very subtle, and you have to pay attention to see it. But this is her problem fundamentally with where she finds herself, is that Anakin is teaching her how to survive, not how to live. And that becomes sort of this very uneasy tension. And she fears, knowing what she knows now and where Anakin, you know, is headed, that same darkness will eventually take her, right? And she has a Padawan now in Sabine. And I saw some interesting analysis online that suggests even though Sabine is not good with the Force, even though she has little to no abilities that we can see at this time, that she's already crossed that stage as a Mandalorian of being a warrior. And so ergo, there's not going to be some fall from grace or some darkness, what have you. So I thought that was an interesting subconscious. We haven't spent any time with Ahsoka and Sabine's earlier training prior to when we run into them in this series, but that could have been something that was driving this and fueling this all along. So we have this battle of Ryloth where they're the first time we see them, and again, Hayden Christensen, can I just say as an aside, I know he's probably given a lot more heavy lifting to do in the Kenobi, because he had to play Vader, and he had to have the flashbacks with Obi-Wan, and then in the end, he had to confront his master, Obi-Wan, and he had to be defeated by him but not killed, because we have to honor canon. But this episode, just in this one 25, 30-minute spurt of Hayden Christensen, he was tremendous. And he showed some of that cavalier attitude that came off in the animated series, even though he didn't voice the animated characters. He was cocky, and he was trying to make jokes on the battlefield to ease his Padawan, and he was compassionate. And this is an Anakin that we didn't get to see quite enough of in between episodes 2 and 3, for example. By the time we catch up with him at the end of the Clone Wars in episode 3, he's already starting to worry about Padme and the twins and all of that. So, but this is sort of an unburdened Anakin that we get to glimpse, dressed in the costume that his animated character wore. And it's great. It's just absolutely great. And hats off to him, because initially when he entered there was, you know, fierce criticism that he was, you know, just another pouty teenager, didn't like sand. And he's really like turned those negatives, I think, you know, fully into a positive. And I would love to see even more of him, you know, however they could figure out a way to do it. Because I think he's really nailing it as far as that goes there.
Yeah, I have to say that one of the funniest things I think between Kenobi and this series, especially now having watched this episode, I don't know that I've ever had a more negative opinion of an actor change so completely between these two shows' performances and his original performance. Now, hindsight being what it is, I realize that writing and direction affected Hayden Christensen quite a bit in those two films. I mean, plus he was young, right? And so I think as a younger actor, you're just not as strong as you are when you've had some ups and downs and chops. I will say right away that I wish we got a lot more of this Anakin that we see here in this episode in episodes 2 and 3. I hope if they do a Vader series that he's able to play Vader in some capacity and, you know, maybe have some flashbacks to the Clone Wars or training, you know, Ahsoka or, you know, what have you, so we can get a little bit more of classic unburdened Anakin. I love that idea of Anakin unburdened. To me, it's something I wish we would have gotten more to sort of flesh out those stories that we saw. That, how does Anakin become Vader? Because he sort of is always just kind of shitty, and I think that's one of the things that forgive the language there, but he's just kind of crappy. He goes from like a kid that doesn't know anything, that's sort of thrust into this whole Jedi thing, and sort of accidentally there. I guess it just feels kind of forced. Hey.
Hello.
But then in episode 2 and 3, like he comes across as like he's already Vader. Like there's no real development. He almost feels like a static character in a way. Like the internal struggle of him betraying his Jedi upbringing essentially just doesn't feel like it's really there. He always feels like he's
Yeah.
yeah. It always feels like that's just him. He's just a piece of crap. Like and Obi-Wan for some reason doesn't see it, or sort of sees it but is like actively ignoring it. It just feels very strange. Whereas if you got some of the Clone Wars where he and Obi-Wan did these things together and they fought side by side and they developed this, Padawan, master bond, and then, Anakin's not quite a master, but, he's kind of outgrown his training, so now he takes on a Padawan. There's a lot to that I think, you can only do so much in a movie, right? But there's a lot of that if they'd have just integrated that somehow between those two films, I really feel like we'd have a lot more success. Now, of course, they had to tell a love story, and that's kind of what it was all about. But, to be frank, I got to say, this is a testament to the writing we have today versus the writing from 20 years ago. It's better. I mean, pure and simple, it's better. At least for Hayden Christensen's sake.
Right.
See, I actually think Hayden played. I think he played the role right. I think he was supposed to be a brat in the second one, and he was supposed to be over cocky in the third one, which leads him down that path. So I think with what he was given, I actually thought he did a really good job with it. I think people kind of missed the mark when it came to that. Not you, Urza, because you're on top of it, but other people that aren't like the Graying Jedi here.
Right.
And I think it's kind of funny too, because Vader has a redemption arc, and it seems like Hayden Christensen, his acting career is going along the same arc in a sense, because we're appreciating what he did.
Yeah.
And to that point, look, I'll fight anyone on this point right now. The battle between Kenobi and Anakin in Revenge of the Sith is probably the greatest lightsaber duel I've ever seen.
Sure.
With the Darth Maul fight coming into a close second. I think what they did with that fight is lights out some of the best stuff I've ever seen. The Ahsoka stuff last night was pretty good. I mean, I liked it. But I still think we need to appreciate what they did in that film to have that extended fight the way they did, with the grace and the aggressiveness and the skill that they put into that. I think it was just absolutely lights out. And
I think what ruined it was the dialogue. The fight itself was great. The dialogue was terrible.
Yeah. Yes, I can see that point.
I will never turn my back on. It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground. Like I say that at least 4 times a day in very inappropriate sense.
That line is the only line from that whole fight scene that redeemed it. Honestly, the rest of it is like, the Sith are evil. From my point of view, the Jedi are evil. We'll agree to disagree, I guess. Let's go have a coffee. Like, I don't know. It's just so bad. It's so bad. But I'll support Uther on this. I think that, despite its flaws, was pretty darn incredible. But I think you got a lot of good lightsaber fights in those movies, like, because of animation and how it got so much better compared to the original trilogy. Yoda and Palpatine I thought was fantastic. Dooku and Yoda was great, and Obi-Wan, and honestly, the Darth Maul battle for me is still probably among the finest, because you get Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and they just absolutely kill it. But I will say I was a little disappointed that there was no travel to Mustafar, as came in some teaser images. Any information on that, Psyllium Maas?
So, if eagle-eyed viewers like yourselves, no doubt pulled out that Anakin was using some of his same moves from the Mustafar fight and so forth. There were some twirls and some when he would bring the blade right up next to near Ahsoka. This is in more of the second duel, which we'll get to in a moment. But I think what happened was that people jumped the gun. They probably saw that being filmed in Santa Monica or Manhattan Beach or wherever they film these things. And it didn't have all the bells and whistles. It didn't have the world between worlds or anything. And I think some assumptions were made because the choreography in some places was similar, if not identical, to Revenge of the Sith. They're like, oh my God, they're going back to Mustafar, you know. I think that might have, this is why set reports and set rumors, there are certain websites on the internets that are very dangerous for small children and for Star Wars fans because they will lead you into very serious paths of darkness. And I won't click on them because I know in the past they've like hyped it to the extreme. I'll give you just a brief example. One of them this past week said, Rosario Dawson is being replaced as Ahsoka by Marvel actress. And you're like who? Brie Larson? Like who is replacing Zoe Saldana? Who is replacing her? And it turns out they didn't necessarily have it wrong, but the way that they framed the story, because they were talking about Ariana Greenblatt, who of course appeared in a Marvel. I won't fall for that kind of yellow journalism. But anyways, I digress. Loved Anakin, and Ahsoka still sort of troubled and turmoiled by all of this. Don't forget what Balin told her before he kicked her off the cliff. He tried to put a little shade on her and Anakin's relationship, saying, your part of that legacy is one of death and war. And she, in fact, quotes that line back to Anakin in sort of what is known as the second flashback of this episode. So we see her with her green lightsaber as a true child soldier. Then we move forward in both the Clone Wars and the episode, and now she's got her twin blades, and now she's more of an accomplished fighter. And this is the Siege of Mandalore. And you even get a really cool looking Mandalorian with Darth Maul's horns in a brief battle shot there. Just phenomenal. The Siege of Mandalore, for those that haven't seen the animated show, that's in the final season of Clone Wars. Ahsoka has left the Jedi Order, has turned her back on Anakin, and then she is reluctantly drawn back into the fight, and the fight leads her to Mandalore with Bo-Katan Kryze, whom you'll remember from The Mandalorian, and so her animated avatar and Ahsoka, they lead clone troopers in the fight against Darth Maul, who, I'm not going to take the time to explain how he lives. If you haven't seen Solo, A Star Wars Story, or any of it, forget it. But he's still alive, and he has actually got the dark saber. And so there's this big battle on Mandalore, and Ahsoka has the chance to kill Maul and doesn't. Instead, takes him prisoner and is going to bring him back to Coruscant to stand trial. Here's the thing. While she is leading this fight, Anakin, who comments on the episode that he doesn't remember this battle, it's because he wasn't there, because this battle is going on simultaneously with the events of Revenge of the Sith. So he and Obi-Wan are on Coruscant in the skies above trying to free Chancellor Palpatine from a trap of his own devising. So while they're doing that, Anakin doesn't even know that Ahsoka's returned into combat. There's some poor communication between them. He's not even aware that she's off doing this thing on Mandalore. And so he comments, his force apparition comments on here, I don't recognize this battle. And she says, because you weren't here, Master. And this is where, and so when they're trying to bring Maul back, Order 66 comes through. And the clones that she's with, the clone troopers, obviously turn on her, except Captain Rex, who is one of the animated characters, And in this episode, Captain Rex, this is one of my Kyber crystals, he makes a live-action debut. You never see his face, but that's Tamura Morrison doing his original voice of the clone troopers. And this is obviously before they snapped. It was Ahsoka who helped remove his inhibitor chip, allowing him to have his own personality. And then Rex will appear in Rebels and in the Bad Batch animated shows and so forth. He was at the Battle of Endor, apparently. You can pick him out, but again, we don't have that kind of time or bandwidth. So here we are in the Siege of Mandalore, and Anakin tells Ahsoka, you were part of a legacy. From Yoda to Dooku to Qui-Gon to Obi-Wan to Anakin and then to her. This unbroken chain of Jedi masters and Force sensitives. And she questions that legacy, saying, look what happened to you, Master. I'm paraphrasing, but look what happened to you, Master. It ended, just as Balin said, in death and war. And Anakin's response deserves an exact quote. He says, you're more than that because I'm more than that. And so it's, what a moment, really, because it's almost as if this manifestation of Anakin in her own consciousness, has to try and justify, or I don't know if it's a full apology, but realizes that his darkness, and he can't just be about his fall. And he doesn't want her to reject him in this moment based on what happened to him. Like he wants her to believe that he has been redeemed. And so it drives him into sort of a rage, and he ignites his saber again. We should comment that in between these two, there's a terrific sort of blink and you miss it moment where Anakin on the battlefield actually becomes Darth Vader through Ahsoka's eyes, actually, and then, transforms back. But here, no such tomfoolery is necessary. When he ignites his saber, this time it is not a Jedi blue, but a Sith red, and his eyes have turned over into their animalistic yellow contacts, and suddenly we are looking at Lord Vader before he was burned at Mustafar by his master. And this duel is to kill. This is not the what I would characterize as the training duel that we saw in the World Between Worlds. This one, he intends to kill his Padawan if she refuses to learn her lesson. And they battle. She kicks her out of the past and literally back into this other realm. They spar in much the same way that Obi-Wan and Anakin sparred on Mustafar. And again, Ahsoka beats him. Again, she disarms him and has the saber to his neck to deliver the killing blow, and her eyes briefly cloud, and she has taken the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And this is one of those echoing moments that Dave Filoni and George Lucas and everyone likes to talk about. In reality, in what we would construe as the reality of the storyline, it was Luke, his son, that redeemed and saved Anakin Skywalker by refusing to fight, throwing down his lightsaber and causing his father to rise up against Emperor Palpatine. Ahsoka gets to have that moment. She gets to redeem Anakin, but in her own context, in her own spiritual way, and one that is not part of the established reality, but at least for her, she forgives him, herself, all of that guilt, all of that uncertainty, all of that fear is dissipated. And she says, I choose to live. And then that transforms Anakin back into her master. And he tells her, there's hope for you yet, or I'm paraphrasing there, but and that was basically the lesson, is that you have to stop being a warrior, and you need to start being a Jedi. And that means that, and what's exciting is I don't know what that means. I don't know, going forward in the last 3 episodes of this series, and barring a second season or further development and future appearances in other shows or a big screen movie Filoni's planning, I don't know what that means for her journey. I am so excited to find out what a different approach might look like for her, because the Ahsoka that goes into the world between worlds and the one that comes out is a different character. And not just because of a costume change or, now that she smiles on the bridge of her starship with Huang. And I'm very anxious to see what they have in store for this, quote, transformed Ahsoka, who again has sort of made her peace with it. She literally, to overplay the obvious Catholicism of the ritual, which was another thing of Tolkien, who was a devout Jesuit. The world between worlds condenses into water, in which she is literally baptized, and she is literally drawn out of that water back into the light, the heavenly light above, which turns out to be an X-Wing's landing lights, and she is reborn, right? And yes, that's corny and it's on the nose, but it's also, the hero's journey. And that's what's going to fuel these last 3 episodes. What becomes apparent watching this episode and all of its subtext and text and everything, this hunch for Grand Admiral Thrawn and Ezra Bridger and another galaxy and the Yuuzhan Vog and all of these other things, they're really they're MacGuffins, right? They're the classic Hitchcock thing where it's not important if we actually get there. Obviously, fans would like to see Grand Admiral Thrawn and perhaps Ezra Bridger and all of that. From a story standpoint, it's important, but that's not really what the show was about. And the fact that they've kept them off screen for 5 of the 8 episodes thus far just sort of proves that. I will go out on a limb and say that we may not get a Grand Admiral Thrawn sighting till pretty much the conclusion of the series, if only to then catapult him across a variety of future streaming shows, another season, the big movie. I mean, if he's introduced in the next episode, and he may very well be, and he is somehow defeated or thwarted, well, that kind of undercuts your idea of, the big bad, right? I mean, if Thanos had been defeated in a post-credit scene of Guardians of the Galaxy or somehow made to look foolish, we probably wouldn't have been so distraught at the end of Infinity War. So I feel like just by sort of plot necessity, the less Thrawn we actually get as we build him up, probably the better. So I think fans preparing for some epic, showdown or conflict on that. I'm not saying we won't get it. I don't know. But I think we should prepare ourselves that this is supposed to be, they're going to play the long game, as you might expect. And so I think this episode sort of proves all along that this show was really about Ahsoka reconciling with her master and figuring out a way to move forward as a character without, again, all those questions that were asked. Because people said, what, does Anakin had a Padawan? Well, what the heck was all that about?
I think it's deeper than that.
Okay.
I think it's setting up, and now I can't believe I'm actually going to reference the prequels that I cannot stand. I think this is all about
pod racing.
Oh man,
God help us.
Everyone, thank you for this podcast. We appreciate you showing up. This is the very last episode because Urza hit it right on the head. It's all about pod racing. That's how it started. That's how it ends.
Yes.
No more Jedi. Everything's done with. Thank you, everybody. I think it's...
You said people gonna die?
I don't know.
They should have made him a Sith. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay, that's fine.
With that being said, I think this is all about the idea of transitioning. Literally, it's about our podcast. It's about the Graying Jedi. I think this is the transition from good and bad, right? Like there's this delineating line to that's really not what it's about anymore. I think Balin's a part of that too. And now that I'm thinking about Yoda burning all those books, to me, that's getting rid of the old, and now we're transitioning into a new era of what Jedi are, right? It's whether it's the constant battle within or knowing that you're not always good, you're not always bad, you walk this fine line, or you have your own interior your own internal motives or whatever that is. I think that's, to me, I think this is setting up the future of Star Wars, right? And it should play right into Rey with her movies that are coming up, because she's probably going to train this next era of Jedi, which is probably why Luke's whole thing fell apart, because it was too much of a light, good side, Sith side, where it seems like Anakin almost broke that in a sense, right? Because he was bad for so long, but then kind of redeemed himself. Do we really know of another Sith that's ever done that? Palpatine was bad, even though he somehow still made it and showed up in the rest of the movies, but he was still evil.
I think one of the reasons, and I don't want to get too sidetracked on this, because this will be a discussion for a future episode of The Graying Jedi. I think part of the reason of the frustration of people's views of Luke's journey in Last Jedi, and where they may course correct here for Rey if she takes on the mantle of trying to create a new order, is that so much of it we didn't get to see, right? Aside from the flashback of Kylo Ren's like betrayal, we saw that moment, right, where where Luke was going to strike him down and then didn't, and then the place burned, but we never saw like his students, right? And I think the Mandalorian tried to do a little bit of his teaching philosophy with Grogu during, actually, ironically, the Book of Boba Fett. But I think part of it that was frustrating was, again, with that gap in time, we wanted not necessarily to see Luke show up and swing his lightsaber and destroy droids and all of that, but we never got to see what they said, like, well, Luke tried to start a new Jedi Order and failed. And now, as you say, this could be sort of like the apology. There could be, like with Ahsoka, like between her and Rey, and giving Jedi not so much a black and white Sith and Force, but more of an ambiguity and more of a charcoal kind of flavor. Maybe we're going to finally see how you build an order from the ground up, because we didn't, even as a huge fan of the sequel trilogy, and don't writhe in pain when I say that, I wanted to see more of that, and I regret that we didn't get that chance to spend more time with Luke, like seeing what he attempted. How could we appreciate his failure without really knowing what it was, if you will, that led him to that point. So I feel like that could be some of your frustration, is like too much happened. Oh yeah, Luke failed at his, and then
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but this episode might justify the prequels as well, because they were so, to your point, bringing a child onto the battlefield, not really letting them become a Jedi, but turning them into a soldier, blinds them to what the Jedi really are, right? Which kind of... Because I feel like Qui-Gon's the first gray Jedi anyway, because Qui-Gon was going against the Council and believing in things that didn't completely align, but he wasn't evil. So he was walking that line as well. Then he's taken Anakin under his wing, though Kenobi seemed to be always on the right side in a sense, or on the good side. So maybe this episode allows says that that's okay, that all that happened. I guess that's what I'm getting at. The same thing with the sequel trilogy too. I can't believe I'm justifying all these movies right now, but maybe that's the genius of the episode. The acting was still awful, but in the first one, but that's a whole other story. I guess I really can't let it play into that when I'm more referencing the mythos, right?
Right.
Because that's kind of been my problem. And again, like you're saying, this goes along with in the prequels, and Urza, jump in anytime you want. In the prequels, I wanted to see Vader tearing stuff up, because that was the story we got in the first three, right? Or not in the first three, in A New Hope and everything. That Vader was hunting down any Jedi that happened to be left over. Like, he was the one going out there. I always envisioned him in his TIE fighter going out there and hunting down any Jedi that were left. That was always my vision. And we never got that. And I always said that's what we should have got in the prequels. Just like in the sequels, we should have seen Luke at the height of his power, in my opinion. At least that's what I wanted to see. Is that a bunch of fanboy cheese? It probably is, but too bad. That's my Luke Skywalker, and that's the way I feel, and it's how I feel about that. Which also makes me wonder if Jason shows up to Luke's academy at any time, and does he actually make it?
I think
that's another important point too.
He would be the right age, and
I know I'm great. Just say it there, Maas. I know I'm hitting on all these points, because that's what we do here at the Graying Jedi. And when you go ahead and comment below, I want to know what you all think as well. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, I thought Jason Syndulla and I mean, meanwhile, while all this is going on with Ahsoka, they're searching for her and trying to keep the New Republic at bay. Love the Senator Organa shout out.
Yeah.
Doubtful we will see I don't want to see a CGI. I mean, we saw it in Rogue One.
I don't either.
And we saw it in Rogue One, and for that moment it worked in that context. But I really don't want to see, like, Mon Mothma can be the stand-in for good governance of the New Republic.
Which I think that's what they're doing.
Right. So for me, that was a great little, like, aha. But I don't need to suddenly recast her or, do what they all of that. I hope that that's off the table. But Jason's, it's no secret that he would be Force sensitive. His father was a Jedi, who also gets his first shout out here. Hun Yang tells him that Kanan Jarrus was his father. But just the way they did that moment, like, he's like, Mom. And she's like, look, I'm busy, kid. I'm like, Mom, no, come listen. What? Do you hear it? Do I hear what? Lightsabers. And again, we don't, and then all of a sudden we hear what he's hearing. And John Williams' Force theme for the first time in the show starts to come up quietly. And what's remarkable is that he gets Hera to hear it too, which goes back into this whole theory, like Sabine, that you don't have to be a Jedi to necessarily at moments, at times, tap into this universal energy field. And so, and I don't think she's doing it to humor her kid. I think she hears the same thing, which is why they then redouble the search. And so, yes, Lord Uther, I thought to myself, boy, if the Luke Academy thing isn't about 10, 12 years down the road from where we're seeing here, does he go there? Does he die? Does he escape? Like, that would be tremendous. Should Ahsoka start training him? So, yes, that's...
I think I greatly appreciate this episode. Now, just for all of our millions
and millions
of fans, last night, yes, I sent the council here my favorite Team America vomiting picture GIF because I was so upset with the episode. But now the more that we're talking, and I was talking to my buddy today, Big Bobby H, shout out to you because I know you listen every week. We were talking Ahsoka. He was turning me as well. This episode might borderline on genius because if we go back to what Kenobi said in A New Hope, that the Force is something that surrounds us and binds us together, the possibility, because I was sitting there going, what, now Hera's Force sensitive? But that's not the case. It could be, like you said, when you're just in tune with it, you're in tune with it, no matter who you are, no matter what your midichlorian count is, right? And I think Jason is I don't think he's Force sensitive. I think he flat out has Jedi powers, in my opinion, and showing that as a young kid. Urza, we haven't heard from you, and I'm just jumping in here at all these different points. Please.
Well, one thing I would point out is the idea of the Force sensitivity and the changing of how Jedi are is something that another favorite series of mine has already done. So this is not new ground. It just happens to be new ground for Star Wars. And it gets back to my namesake, which of course is Magic the Gathering, where the original Planeswalkers, who are sort of like semi-omnipotent gods, fundamentally are changed because essentially most of them die, basically. Because they, wrote all these books and then they're like, we kind of petered out the storyline. We got to transform the stories. And then they realize you just can't duplicate Urza. There's only one Urza. And yeah, it's true. There's only one of me.
On this show.
But, they also had to change it because it's like you can't have essentially a god just like change up these compelling stories. And, it's all, of course, all driven by the game too. So like the game has to have some kind of usable thing, right? So you got to bring in fresh blood and a fresh look at sort of the same thing, but you can't divorce the Force from Star Wars. You can't take Planeswalkers out of Magic. You just change them fundamentally. Like instead of the spark that makes them who they are, or the Force sensitivity that makes them Jedi, you make it something that kind of anybody can achieve, like these superpowers. it just isn't quite what we're used to. So you're getting these sort of in-between Jedi, which, to be frank, they were always there. They were always powerful people, but they don't get the attention that the Skywalkers get, or the Yodas, or Foundlings, or whatever, or the Mace Windus get. You know, because they're the true superpowers of the exceptional. You know, it's kind of like if you're thinking X-Men, right? Let's do a crossover right now. Toad in X-Men. What's his superpower really? Nothing. Like he can hop around and eat bugs. Like kind of a boring, X-Men. But you know what? Pals around with Magneto, sort of gets elevated, right? We get a Sabine Wren who's barely in tune with the Force, but pals around with Ahsoka, gets elevated because of it, develops as perhaps a warrior, but also develops a bit of that Jedi code, and whatever Force sensitivity she does or does not have may be enhanced or greater nuance added to it to where, yeah, she's kind of a Jedi in a way. But not a Jedi, maybe more like the C Squad, And that's fine. Like, I always thought of Star Wars, if it had to have a flaw, you get these very rank and file stormtroopers that are essentially good for nothing. They are literally just meat sacks. You get Jedi and Sith. You get an Emperor, and you get your rogue sort of cowboy western angle, and then a love story with a princess. But the princess is also empowered and kind of women's movement-esque, let's say. All good stuff, and definitely of the period, but there's a whole lot of people in the rebellion that are not any of those people, that play fundamental roles. Look at Rogue One. I think that's why that was such a smash of a success. And this is the cool place that Star Wars could and should go, is you have this amazing opportunity now to tell these unique stories about all these people who aren't the Skywalkers. To be frank, the Night of the Skywalkers was done in '86. You don't got to do it again. Those were some great matches. I have them on 2 different VHS tapes and DVD. Night of the Skywalkers, fantastic. If you haven't heard about it, classic WCW. That being said, we've played out these big money players, right? But that doesn't mean that like the entire New Republic is contingent upon what Rey and Kylo Ren do or don't do, or the First Order, which is predicated on Kylo Ren, really isn't driven by Ren. It's driven more by this Snoke person who is essentially just a clone, again with the clones of Palpatine, which is cool. I mean, honestly, I thought that was kind of a neat angle. It gave it a little something. It was a little obvious, frankly, but you also have this whole other side of the First Order, which we get to see in like The Mandalorian, and you get to see the rank and file stormtroopers who kind of hate the Empire and have come to see sort of the evils of it and want to get revenge. And it's like, there's a lot of stories to be told here. And this Ahsoka storyline, like, yeah, we've got big money players, Grand Admiral Thrawn, Senator Organa. There are definitely like people there who sort of like tertiary involved, and then like the B team, Ahsoka arguably B team,
Yeah.
the Mandalorian B team, I mean, but the A team is either dead or like too old to make movies. Sorry, not to be too succinct, but sorry, it's true. You can't have Luke Skywalker come in and tell his Academy stories. And the CGI Luke Skywalker, frankly, it's not impressive. I love it. I'm not going to say, like, I've always wanted to see more Luke. I wanted to see more Han Solo, more Chewbacca, more Princess Leia. All of those stories would be great if they had made them in 1990, 1099. And then maybe the prequel trilogies came later. Because I think you could have done so much more. But now, where are our opportunities? Well, we have Jason, who could age with the character, and we could tell a Skywalker Academy story, and maybe weave in glimpses and hints about Luke but he's really focusing on his main Padawan Kylo Ren. But you get all these other Jedi Academy stories, and it's like,
Jedi.
chances are there was at least a dozen or so other Jedi, and a handful of them probably weren't there when Kylo Ren lost his shit and destroyed everything. It's sort of like Order 66. There's always going to be Jedi crawling out of the woodwork that people just sort of forgot about because they're B Squad or C Squad or D Squad, or whatever Sabine is, Z Squad maybe, H Squad, if you pick my meaning up there. So, look, I think it's just all of these extra stories that they're kind of ignoring because people crave in a big silver screen thing a big bad and a big good. They like monster movies, right? If you're going to have Godzilla, you're going to have Mothra, and you're going to pit them against each other. That's all well and good. It's not really compelling. Compelling stories are the human stories you can relate to. I can't really relate to Luke Skywalker's journey, and on a surface level, that's just watching something for pure entertainment. Han Solo, I can relate to. Princess Leia to some extent, I can relate to. There's the father-son thing going on with Luke and Vader. It's good. It's entertaining. But, the reason a show like Ahsoka and Mandalorian are successful is because they're telling stories, to be quite honest, we can sort of put ourselves in their shoes. Or somebody on the show who's still impactful, even though they're just a regular dude. And I think Hera is one of those people that, almost deserves her own series on her own. If you want to extend this even further. But there's a ton of potential here. I'd love to see a season 2. I mean, I think you could tell sort of the rise of Grand Admiral Thrawn, the rise of the First Order. At some point, Thrawn dies. We know that. And then that's when maybe Kylo Ren steps in and takes over and picks up the pieces of what Thrawn left behind to reestablish this sort of pseudo-empire. There you go. I mean, there's your bridge between these series. And then the Rey movies, to be honest, if that's going to be the rebirth of the Jedi Order, what do you do with the Grey Jedi at that point? Because to me, Rey is just sort of accidentally walking into Jedidom. She's not formally trained. She's kind of navigating the Force on her own. But to set up an academy feels very formal. So, is this... How are we going to play that? There's some gray area to explore there, but it's compelling, and that's where I got to agree with Lord Uther here. I think it's the hidden genius of this episode is that it's knocking open all these doors. It's creating all this potential. The next 3 episodes, though, could easily make or break the future of Star Wars. So I really hope they did something artful, because if they just I don't know. Right. I could see this going very south very quick.
Right.
Well, spoiler alert that you're only going to hear on the Graying Jedi. The next episode is 46 minutes, 21 seconds long. I believe it's the 3rd longest installment of any of the television series.
Yes.
So,
yes, Filoni.
Note that, everybody.
Filoni has slots
What's
1 and
happen?
2 with this, the pilot, and then with this episode that he did last night. He will write the other 3.
Got it.
So we'll get a unified voice, but there will be other directors stepping in, including Rick Famuyiwa.
Ric Flair?
Yes, Rick Flair.
Woo!
Rick Famuyiwa, who's done a lot of work on Mandalorian and so forth. He went to USC. He's a great director. My last thing on the Hera Jason scene, I think of it like golf. Like when she's able to tap into the Force. I'm a terrible golfer, but I am capable of having a good hole or two. Yes. I'm capable of hitting a good drive, chipping on, and maybe sinking a putt or two. And I think that's with Hera. I think that just in that moment, under her son's guidance, she's able to do that. And if you asked her to do it a week from Sunday, that she wouldn't hear a thing. So I just think it's... But what I thought was great was the fact that, again, she has even less Force abilities than Sabine, and yet her son was able to guide her towards that. I want to finish up my thoughts on this episode with the one thing that I think Star Wars consistently does, and you guys have addressed it before and even tonight, and something that when it comes to doing it right, it really doesn't have an equal in this sphere. I mean, I don't even think that our other show that we talk a lot about, Star Trek, is able to sort of match that. And that is about the mythos and the mythology, and most importantly, the sense of awe, right? Because Star Wars was born on the big screen. And we remember, whether we were 4 years old or 40, how much the cantina on Mos Eisley, when we first saw that, took our breath away. Or seeing Han Solo trapped in carbonite, or seeing Jabba the Hutt, or whether we think it's cool or not, the very first time we went on a pod race on Bunta Eve in Tatooine, or even the lava flows of Mustafar, or the water-soaked world of Camino. My point being, Star Wars, singularly as a franchise, has always been able to generate, whether through it's a planet's surface or a character or an environment or what have you, a sense of, I've never seen that before. There is genuine, like, this is something that I could not, in my imagination, could not conjure up. And I think the strength of Star Trek, and we've talked about that at length on our other award-winning podcast, The Warp Core, Star Trek excels in taking human stories within the galaxy and making it very relatable and universal and talking about the human adventure. And so they don't get bogged down necessarily in all of the bells and whistles and trappings of science fiction, because they want to tell ultimately the story of how humanity deals with its pain, its pleasure, its crises, and that's where it draws its strength. Star Wars, I think, to Urza Master's point, is about entertainment. It's about mythology. It's about telling this serialized adventure story, and making no bones about it. At the end of the day, that's what it's really there to do, right? It's not supposed to necessarily give you a great wisdom on the human condition or why we're on this third rock from the sun. It is, at the end of the day, supposed to bring you along and sweep you up. And I think the whole sequence with the Purgils is an example of that, because you can marvel at the CGI or say, oh, they did a great job rendering or all of that. But it just sort of takes your breath away when you, and I regret that I only saw it on a 65-inch television screen, but just the sense of scale and scope and majesty of these creatures. And Ahsoka, using the Force to communicate with them, to send them along on their next leg of their journey, if you will. And the reaction of the New Republic ships, as it's like, it was basically like coming face to face with unicorns or dragons. These are not things that people say, oh, look, it's another swarm of Purgils, they'd never seen these things before. These giant mythological beasts, and the episode ended for me on just such a moment of hope and optimism and just sheer awe. And that's when Star Wars works at its best, and it doesn't do silly things that people contradict or dislike. Like, it really can fill that void to a fantasy science fiction fan. It's just about as good as anybody, And I think Star Trek pushes buttons in us that can reach the same heights, but with a whole different feel to them because of where their focus is. So I just want to call out that I just thought that we did this whole thing with Anakin, we saved Ahsoka, and then we got this little coda, this little 10-minute coda with the Purgils, and we're going to go off and find Sabine and Ezra and Thrawn. And I just thought, wow, that's, that kind of thing could end a season, right? You could end it there, and then like next season, we'll see if they get to the galaxy far, far away. But, here it's just a pivot point for us to go hopefully into this, frenetic, frantic 3-episode, sprint to something even more exciting and ambitious. So, and then real fast, my Kyber crystals for this week. We already mentioned Captain Rex being in live action. Did anybody catch Hera's portable scanner? Han Solo wielded one of those on Empire Strikes Back, so it's nice to see the technology being reused in a new context there. And the title of the episode itself, Shadow Warrior, I'm sure lends itself to multiple interpretations. But when Ahsoka plummets into the past, into the Clone Wars, she's at first surrounded by an uncertain void filled with pink smoke and that's before the soldiers start emerging from the mist. That's a direct visual shout out to Akira Kurosawa's. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing this right, or else the people that know him will write into us. Kagemusha is a 1980.
Kagemusha.
Kagemusha is a 1980.
Kagemusha.
Kagemusha is a 1980.
Cage moosh?
Is a 1980 Kurosawa picture. The title literally equals to Warrior of the Shadow. So that's Dave Filoni being cute, and that's why the episode is doing that and showing off the pink smoke, and that's a direct shout out to a award-winning Japanese samurai type epic. So
It's a wonderful movie.
there you go.
Absolutely. I will say that I'm in total agreement. I think Star Wars does it better than virtually anything, and I'm a huge Star Trek fan, but they take maybe the pastoral side of sci-fi and dial it up higher and better than any sci-fi show I've ever seen. The way they create worlds and space battles and just visuals.
Yeah, visual.
I mean, it's artful. I mean, it's industrial light and magic. You know, that's what it is. It's ILM at its absolute finest. The only time I've ever seen that rivaled is in the ILM Star Trek films. I'm thinking motion picture in particular. That to me is the only time we really get that grandeur that we're used to. Although I will say we get some hints at some of that pastoral visual type storytelling in I'm so glad I get to say this, in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. And that's part of the reason why I think that film is underrated, because it reaches towards what Star Trek does really well, which is the mythos, the pastoral, the romantic. Star Wars is very much more modernist, postmodern. Star Trek is more modernist and postmodern. Star Wars is certainly more romantic and certainly more pastoral and kind of classical literature versus a more modernist or postmodern view of how to tell stories. And I think that's Joseph Campbell, right? The base mythology is always your long dark night of the soul. It's the hero's journey, which is virtually every story that Hollywood's ever going to tell anyway, unless you're watching a Godard film or something like Werner Herzog. You're probably not getting a story about the background while floating on a raft down a river and nothing happens the whole time. You just want to jump in the river and get eaten by an alligator to get out of this. But no, I actually do love that flick, by the way. I'm not trashing it. But I think that the beauty that is Star Wars and the beauty that is Star Trek is they're almost complementary in how they are different. For everything we can point out in Star Wars that is like, Star Trek does this better. You could do the same thing with Star Trek, but when you enjoy both, when you watch The Graying Jedi, when you watch the Warp Core podcast, here on Pending Rebrand, hit subscribe and like, drop us a comment. You get the best of both worlds, literally and figuratively. It is no different than spinning up 5150 on your record player. So, with that, I think we've had really lively discussion about this episode. I think it's time we draw our lightsabers. Oh my! And compare colors. Something tells me we didn't put white lightsaber on this scale, so I'm kind of glad we didn't, because it would be a little awkward with what I just said. But I think Psyllium Maas, I think we probably know what your color choice is this week, but I want to turn it over to you first.
It's Yoda green, friend.
Green it is?
It's green. So, as you might have expected there, I'm gonna gush. I think I truly believe, because I have spent a lot of time with this story and these characters and so forth. I'm sure it rang deeper than for someone who, again, didn't have that same emotional investment in these characters, and that's fine. What I hope happens is that the show can meet both people sort of halfway. It can give satisfaction to the people who have been reading the books and the comic books and the animated shows and the spin-offs. And at the same time, for someone who doesn't have that level of devotion or, what have you, engagement, that they can still find things about it that, excite them, make them curious, maybe even say like, hey, you know what, if I ever get a free 6 months out of my life, maybe I'll go back and watch the Clone Wars or Rebels or something. So if the show can meet both sides of the spectrum halfway, for me, I think that's a success. And it more than delivered on my account. I admit to where my biases are and so forth. So I just hope for our sake that the people who don't have that same level of devotion were able to enjoy not just this episode, but the journey. The fact that we're going to a different corner of Star Wars than perhaps, they may be used to, and they can see, they can see its flaws and they can see its gifts and they can be entertained. So that's what I'm hoping for as this story winds down. So Yoda green for me.
Uther?
I'm all right. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna give it 2 different lightsabers. Too bad. Here's why. And if you don't like it, everyone, you should comment below. I'm gonna go green if all of my theories are correct and everything aligns the way I said it should.
Okay.
Too bad. That's how I'm going. If it doesn't for some reason, I'm going to go purple again, but I'm leaning towards green, which is, again, very surprising because, about 24 hours ago, I sent you guys a message of vomit.
It was red.
And here I am going in the complete opposite direction. So I do feel that whether it was intentional or not, which we've had that conversation before, are these things intentional? Sometimes they're not, but it just happens that way. I'll go green. If it's not the case, I go purple.
Okay. And we'll literally
I'm leaning towards green.
we'll literally re-record this so we can have an alternate ending. If it doesnn't go your way, we'll go back and do
I love it.
I
love it.
A bonus,
Like the movie Clue that had
Yes.
4 different endings in movie
Right.
theater.
Oh, so good.
Take that.
So good.
Take
So
that.
good.
That's a great film.
that is a great.
It's going to be bonus footage, The Graying Jedi, Episode 4. I like that. I like that. I think this may be a first for The Graying Jedi. I am also going to go green. I don't think we've had a universal color call. Now, I am not a devotee of the Ahsoka story at all.
Right.
No background on her
Me
other
neither.
than the Mandalorian appearance. So I came into this with just fresh, I'm going to enjoy Star Wars on my expedited lunch break. And I did that today. So we're talking very fresh reaction here. And I was blown away. Again, the imagery, the nuance, my English degree sensors were tingling like Spider-Man on a bus with a robber. Like, I gotta be frank. I loved every second of it. I thought it played into the Force, the Jedi way that I knew and loved from Episode 4. Is what I got out of this episode. That tickled my fancy quite a bit. What really blew up my skirt is sort of all the background characters getting a lot of foreground time. One, I love Hera. Hera is like, I love her in this show. I think she's a fantastic character. I love her sass. Like, hey, I'm a general. I'm going to throw my weight around. It's so Han Solo. Like, everything about that character I'm just enamored with. I regret there was no Sabine in this episode, but I understand why, because it's a 2-parter.
Right.
It is. So I'm okay with that. I really liked Jason. He is what I wish Anakin Skywalker was in Episode 1.
Yeah.
That's
Good point.
if that would have been incredible. That being said, I didn't feel bad about having a child actor on the screen. in either case. I think the young Ahsoka was great. Young Jason, great. I loved the Clone War scenes. Again, I know nothing about it, so it gave me some background as to what Anakin was doing that I didn't know. And it was kind of powerful for me. Like, I'm on this redemption tour with Hayden Christensen. I'm like, all right, dude, like, I love it. Like,
Yeah.
everything he's done Star Wars related since episode 3 seems to just make rehab of his character and totally change my opinion of him as an actor, which is extremely hard to do, by the way. I am very committed to my opinions. I also really, really loved how they took a pot shot at bureaucracy, which anytime Star Wars does this, it's always fantastic. And having the ending scenes with the Pergles,
Virgo, yeah.
Steve Urkel's flying away from the planet through space. I'm sorry, that was absolutely fantastic. Where you get this like slack-jawed, bigwig at the helm of a ship going, "Come on, just surrender. Like I don't have time for this." And it's like, "Oh my God, space whales!" I can actually get over the fact that it's space whales. It's not like sparkling vampires where I'm still salty about it. Space whales, that's as cool to me as the original space whales, which, by the way, stolen from Star Trek 4. I'm sorry to say. But that's my favorite, probably my favorite Star Trek movie next to Generations. It's just awesome. Like, I do not feel bad about it. I don't feel like they've ripped anything off. I think it's unique. I think it's wonderful. I actually am very excited that they're expanding the Star Wars universe to a new galaxy. One, because it opens up yet even more Star Wars stories that could be incredible. The one book I read and remember very well was when Luke was searching out through the Force to find other Force sensitives and came across this Beyond the Outer Rim traveling Force sensitive person. And I don't remember what the name of the big bad was, but they were like these machine based, like they're like the Borg of Star
It was
Wars.
the Yuzan Vog.
Is that the Yuzan Vog?
That's what they were. The machine-based creatures that yeah.
No, that was animal. They were or like insect animal based.
Oh,
was
were they?
Devon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So they're actually ripping off the Stargate big bad. I forget what they were called, who are like robot insects that then can transform into people and objects. Which, by the way, Stargate is a show we could absolutely do a podcast on because I could talk for years on that. No problem. No problem at all. I will say that, I did not anticipate to give any of this show a green lightsaber. I didn't know that I was going to be blown away by a character I knew nothing about. And I'm absolutely delighted that this episode happened, and I do feel like it's done all the things we've said it's done in rehabbing these prequels and justifying these animated series, which I'm going to be honest, I might never actually watch, but I'm really appreciating them and how they've fleshed out this universe, I guess, if we want to put it that way. Well, my fellow Jedi Council members, I dare say I grant this episode the rank of Master.
Yes.
Indeed.
It is on the Council, and I grant it the rank of Master. But next episode, our 5th episode of The Graying Jedi, our first real milestone as a podcast, I'm looking forward to quite a bit because now we're going to get the new universe, or the new galaxy. We're going to get something we truly have never seen with Star Wars, and I don't think anybody can say they're not excited about that prospect. My one regret will be we probably won't get any Hera in the next episode, or very limited amounts, and that's a disservice. Anywho, I thank you all for joining us here, there, everywhere, abroad, overseas, and in a galaxy far, far away. As always, may the Force be with you.
Force be with you.